Thank you to ATA again for inviting me to join the panel. It's a privilege for me, working in an EU institution, to be also coming along to join discussions with an organisation that has such a proud Atlanticist tradition. I'll try and keep my remarks brief and to the point and respect the time. The first thing I'd like to say is obviously to pay, on behalf of the EU Counter-Terrorism Coordinator, obviously our deepest condolences to the people of France, to the families and friends of the people affected by Friday's atrocity. And also I think I would pay tribute to the heroism of the French police force and the action we saw both on Friday and yesterday in Saint-Denis. I was very interested to hear in the first panel the remarks from the distinguished delegate from the Kurdish regional government. Very interested to hear that, and I thought I would want to say as well that the Peshmerga's fight against Daesh is Europe's fight, and the efforts that you and your forces are going to are hugely admired and appreciated in the EU. I think his remarks also highlighted the first thing I wanted to look at, which is what is the threat facing Europe. Prime Minister Valls, indeed, this morning has referred to the threat from a potential chemical and biological attack. We heard about the use of mustard gas and chlorine in the field in Syria and Iraq by Daesh. I don't think we can rule anything out, to be frank. I think there are other threats out there. We shouldn't forget the threat from Al-Qaeda, but seen from Justus Lipsius, Pont Schumann, where I'm based here in Brussels, Daesh is overwhelmingly the priority. We're not just looking at this threat in terms of Mesopotamia, Syria, Iraq. A number of affiliates have sprung up around the world. Perhaps the most prominent, I would say, would be Boko Haram, where with that affiliation you have two groups, Daesh and Boko Haram, that were responsible for about, I think, 51% of all people killed by acts of terrorism in 2014. So that is not inconsiderable. There are affiliates elsewhere. Central Asia is another area of great concern, given the volume of foreign terrorist fighters we assess have travelled from that part of the world. So there is an appreciation that this is a huge challenge. We also shouldn't forget, I think, that the anti-ISIL military coalition is making gains on the field and in cooperation with Kurdish forces. I understand about 30% of the territory that was under Daesh's control in Iraq has now disappeared, as they've lost that. So there are, amidst in the gloom, there are bright spots, and we shouldn't forget those. The other aspects of the threat that I think preoccupy the EU, apart from the sort of immediate attack planning, are the extent to which Daesh is still able to recruit, and the internet looms very, very large here, and social media. The EU has taken strides here, and it is looking to it has established actually, an internet forum. And this is involving members of the industry, so we have delegates from Facebook, Twitter, Ask FM, some of the more obscure apps which are very familiar to European youth, are coming along and talking to EU officials and member states about what we can do to curb the volume and the tone of inflammatory extremist content which is going online. And it's a volume battle, and it's a narrative battle. We have to get much more effective at getting out our view, our messaging on why what Daesh represents is a lie. I think the first delegate we heard from this morning talked about the truth. That very much rings true for me in the battle space that is now the internet. There is a debate, I know, and I've heard this in the European Parliament too, the risk of going too far in seeking to curb internet traffic, and also there is a valid argument that if you drive content off one platform, it just reappears on another. I don't think that should get in the way of us trying to take a stand on this and trying to do something. What the EU is doing on that, the EU has established in Europol in The Hague an internet referral unit. So this is essentially seconded police officers from around the Union who are scanning internet content, and when they see that it is breaching the terms and conditions of companies' own rules, they are referring to the company and saying, we think you need to pull this down. And it's got about a 90% strike rate so far, so it's been pretty successful. I think one argument to be had, though, is the extent to which the companies themselves maybe need to put more into this kind of regulatory effort. I don't think it should just be incumbent on governments and national police forces to do this. We do need an effective partnership with the industry. Turning, I think you'll all be very keen, I'm sure, to hear about what Europe is doing in the immediate aftermath of last Friday. EU Justice and Home Affairs ministers are meeting today in Brussels and tomorrow. We hope to see an ambitious set of conclusions, as we call it in the terminology, issue from that meeting, covering a range of issues around the need to improve the external border, security at the EU's external border, to improve information sharing between police and intelligence, and use of what's called a Schengen Information System database. This is a pretty important tool in the fight against ensuring that when people turn up at the external border and their passport, that we have an entry on the database to suggest this is a person of potential interest to the police, that is immediately notified and actions taken. I think the EU, my boss, Gilles de Kerchove, would also echo fully what Prime Minister Valls has said this morning about the urgent need for a passenger name records directive. Prime Minister Valls talked about this as being key now to Europe's collective security. It's been with the European Parliament, I think, for some time, but we really need passage of that legislation, I think, by the end of this year. That's the internal side. There are some of the ideas where I think you'll be hearing more about in the press tomorrow about what the EU is doing in terms of tackling the internal security threat. There's also a big external agenda, and the two have to mesh. So in February this year, the EU identified a number of priority countries where we want to engage and build capacity across the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, and also Turkey, which is absolutely critical to this effort. We want, the EU needs the strongest, to build the strongest possible CT collaboration with Turkey, which is unfortunately been such a transit point for many EU foreign terrorist fighters. I think Turkey rightly says this is a two-way process. They need fast and efficient information from member states on individuals of concern who we think may be traveling. They also rightly expect us, member states, to try and tackle this at source and ensure that people who are at potential risk don't get on the plane. But equally, inevitably, given the scale of the problem and the fact that many of the people who've gone to Iraq and Syria are not known to, they're newly radicalized individuals, there will be an element of people turning up in Turkey and us having to act very quickly in real time to try and turn those people around. I think there is an immediate effort going on in Tunisia, given it's such an important country, I think, in terms of what happened with the Arab Spring and the fact that it is one of a country where democracy is in place. There's a big effort after what happened in Bardo and Sousse to try and ensure that there are no further attacks and that we get the tourism infrastructure and the Tunisian economy, we get it back to the place it needs to be. But across the region, I think there is a big piece for the EU on countering violent extremism. And the EU has established, through the European Commission, a very effective, very impressive, I think, body called the Radicalization Awareness Network. This comprises about 500 civil society organizations right across Europe who are coming together to compare notes on what specific strategies work in individual communities in terms of combating radicalization and addressing the threat, including online threat. This isn't a government-led process, this is civil society organizations, and I think this radicalization challenge we face, it's really a bottom-up challenge as much as a top-down one. And it's good to know that this network is now going to be in a position to export some of this expertise. So tentatively, we are looking to get this network exposed to countries in Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey, so that they can work with civil society organizations in those parts of the world too. I'll stop there because I'm conscious of the time pressures, but I'm looking forward to your questions.